In this episode, a look at personal archives of California history. David Boulay's collection of California orange ephemera.
The orange became a symbol of California's promise. Commercial boosterism, political expediency, and it all came together.
The political posters of the Center for the Study of Political Graphics.
Political posters were not only not considered an art form, but they're basically the stepchild of the art world.
The family archive of Ernest Marquez.
The reason why I started collecting was to get information, documents, and papers and photographs of my family.
Kent Kirkton's collection of African American photography at Cal State Northridge.
It's amazing to the extent to which the ethnic communities in this city are undocumented in the institutional holdings.
Joseph Hawkins' sci-fi collection at the One National Gay and Lesbian Archives.
Homosexuals as a group of people were disproportionately, it seems to me, interested in these groups because of their ability to create cover for meetings.
Hi, I'm David Kippen. I run a nonprofit lending library in Boyle Heights called Libro Schmibros, and I teach at UCLA. But I've also had the great honor over the last couple of months of meeting half a dozen people I'd really like to introduce you to. People that we've given the name to of monomaniacs, and they've been very good sports about that. A monomaniac is somebody who cannot stop collecting and cannot, in most cases, stop talking about what he's collecting, especially an LA monomaniac, and I don't know why this is. You don't have to share their monomania. All you need is curiosity about whatever it is they're collecting, whatever it is they're preserving, whatever it is they're researching. They, as I hope you'll soon find, are uniquely qualified, probably better qualified than somebody a little more credentialed in the traditional way, to invite you in to their monomania, and if you're not careful, quite possibly you may find it communicable. First segment is about a gentleman named David Boulay, who seems like a perfectly normal gentleman, very delightful to talk to. By day, he's worked in the advertising industry, he's worked in publicity, but at some point, something happened to David Boulay. The most surprising thing about David Boulay is, however stocked and overstocked his orange room is with all of his materials. You walk into the living room and it's like, wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to meet a monomaniac today. And then it's like this mad scientist who opens the door and you've stepped into Planet Orange. There are orange, not just juicers, but like orange salt shakers and orange crate art and a wonderful cabinet with little compartments full of orange this and orange that. And if I had to draw a link between David Boulay's normal life by day and his orange obsessive life, I would say it has to do with his career as a writer, as a promotional writer, as an ad man, because of course the orange and the entire citrus industry would not have happened if Sunkist hadn't hired the very best artists, the very best copywriters, everybody who they thought could promote their product as well as possible. So David, having worked in this industry, obviously, I think, was drawn to it because these people, these very gifted artists and writers and souvenir designers around citriculture were the very best at their job. They were every bit as good as anybody designing tail fins on Madison Avenue.
I believe that a personal fascination and individual zeal have the opportunity to create a collection that's not just a self-indulgence or a hobby, but can actually have value to the wider world. A love of history and the collector's gene can work together to gather materials that otherwise might be dispersed, unavailable to researchers, and make connections that have real value to the wider world. I've been interested for years as just somebody interested in culture and history about the uniqueness of California. And many decades ago, a friend of mine was a graphic artist. He was working on a project. He took me to a paper ephemera show, something I'd never heard of before. I walked in, there were dozens of vendors selling literally hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper that shouldn't have been there. These were receipts, menus, matchbooks, postcards. And so while my friend was working and looking for the materials he needed, I was entertaining myself going through tens of thousands of postcards. And I gravitated towards that quintessential iconic image, snow-capped mountains, a beautiful sky, a manicured orchard, a lovely home, and I just thought they were great. Well, I have the collector's gene, for lack of any other descriptor, and when I had two, then I wanted to find more, and when I had more, then I wanted to have all of them. And I now have about 600 unique postcards, all dealing with the California citrus industry. And I think that alone is pretty interesting, that an industrial enterprise could produce 600 images that someone thought someone else would want to buy. They did buy them, they sent them, and people saved them. These things are 60, 70, 100 years old, and they were not thrown away. They resonated with people then and now. As I began to collect, and as I had this idea that there was a story behind these images, I began to refine my collection, expand my collection in some ways, to find additional materials besides postcards that showed how the orange was always perceived as special, and that California, since it, as Kevin Starr says, entered history as a myth, and that California as a special place of promise, of potential, of reinvention, and the orange fit right in. It was destiny that the two would come together in some kind of a way, and the orange became a symbol of California's promise and potential. I have organized these originally just as a hobby, but then as I began to work on the book, and pull items out that I knew would be extra useful in the research. But I have organized them by subject matter, so we start with these kind of billboard images of California Orange Day. And this was a day that was celebrated up and down the state of California. It was one of those lovely combinations of sincere enthusiasm, commercial boosterism, political expediency, and it all came together. There was a time in California where from the valley to Orange County, from Ventura all the way down to San Diego, many people could get up in the morning and open a window and smell the wonderful fragrance of orange blossoms. It is hard to overemphasize how big the California orange industry was. In 1895, Riverside, California, from growing oranges, had the highest per capita income in America. And in 1920, as recently as 1920, the number 2 revenue source in the entire state of California, only behind oil, was oranges. It was a huge industry. And while it was huge, most of the groves were small, 3 to 10 acres. And many people owned a small orchard for additional income. School teachers, shopkeepers, celebrities. While there were certainly commercial growers, there were also many people who just had 100 trees and grew them to augment their income. This is the famous, legendary California Orange Crate. These were produced by the thousands, maybe the millions. All oranges were packed in boxes just like this one. After much experimentation, this size, this weight, this construction was deemed the best for shipping fresh fruit thousands of miles. Sunkist was the largest by far packer and shipper of oranges. And because they wanted a stable supply of the wood needed to produce these, they invested in large swaths of timber, which they still own to this day. As a collector, the hunt is a big part of it. Having the items is thrilling, but searching for them and discovering them and coming upon them is really part of the draw. And so I will never lose the interest in doing that, but I have studiously avoided doing that. I still have the collector's gene, but I have some ideas for other projects, and I want to devote my attention and efforts and energy in that direction. And yes, I still slide occasionally back and type in California orange orchard and just see what pops up. I did it just the other day, and there were some images that I thought were very compelling. Not more compelling than images I have, just variations on a theme. There would have been a time when I probably would have scooped those up immediately, but I did not. So once I had one juicer, I thought, wow, what other juicers could there possibly be? And so I did go down a path of collecting lots of sun-kissed juicers, because over the decades, the size, color, and materials changed as aesthetic taste changed in America. And I got waylaid, hijacked by all the variations there were. And so I now have a number of these, and they're quite heavy when you go to move them. One of the things I think that a monomania collector can do is to burrow so deep and with such focus into something and find connections that perhaps a formally trained academic just wouldn't have the time, maybe not the interest, but to really dig down into the kind of minutia that might have historical relevance, it may not. I mentioned that I got sidetracked with the electric juicers and how they evolved over 20 or 30 years. I now have those. There may be a story there. There may be a story of the companies that were subcontracted to produce these. There may be a story from a design, home decorating aspect. Why did they change? Why did they get larger or smaller? Why did the color of the glass bowl change from tin to Vaseline glass to jadeite glass to something else? So there are lots of stories to tell, and if someone without monomania didn't collect it, it would just be dispersed and harder for someone else to begin to see that such variation existed, and what does that mean, and how can that be a part of a larger story that they're trying to tell.
Carol Wells is the founder of the Center for the Study of Political Graphics, which, if you're driving down Sepulveda through Culver City, on your left, look for the totally nondescript building that you will not see no matter how hard you are looking for it. But you step inside, and it is, archive doesn't do it justice. This is an office filled with what must be poster holders that are purpose-built, because you would not otherwise find something this large, hanging in ranks from the ceiling, with inside of them a kind of living history, or at least it feels alive, of political graphics, not just in America, but all over the world. These are posters that have, in many cases, been through war. Carol's collection was, I believe, among the very first, if not the first of its kind, anywhere in the world. But if you think of it as an international collection, which it certainly is, you're at risk of missing out on what a very LA story it is, not just because of Carol's own background, growing up here, being politicized in demonstrations here, but also, many of the posters, as you might imagine, are posters that have come to light right here in town because of the many struggles that have been fought right here in Southern California. This is where it belongs, and thank heaven this is where it appears it's going to stay for a good long time.
When I first started collecting, I wasn't collecting as a collector. When I first started collecting, it was as a solidarity activist, and I was using the posters that I collected to organize against the U.S. wars in Central America. So there was no idea of starting a center. There was no idea of being a collector. I didn't see it as art. I didn't want it hanging on my wall. I didn't see it as primary historical documentation. It was a poster. And I literally had that attitude, almost that dismissive attitude of a poster, that once I realized how important posters are, that I was resenting that attitude in other people. In 1981, I went to Nicaragua because I was hired as a research assistant to help David Kunzel, who was a full professor, art historian, and he had 7,000 to 8,000 posters that he'd been collecting since the Vietnam War period. And he would go every summer to a different country and collect posters. And one day we went into the women's organization and they were planning a big demonstration for like a couple days later in the week. And they just had delivered a pile, I mean hundreds if not more, of the posters that they produced for this demonstration. And you could still smell the ink. It was literally hot off the press. And so they gave me like 24 of them. And I didn't know what I was going to do with 24 of them. So I figured I'd keep 5 or 6 to take back to LA. And I was regifting them. You know, people would, you know, give me a poster. I said, would you like a poster? And we were living with a family. The woman was a nurse. The man was an accountant. They were very strong supporters of the Sandinistas, but they were middle class, living in a middle class neighborhood. And the middle class, their neighbors were really divided. The ones who supported the Sandinistas and the ones who hated the Sandinistas. So I'd given Velia, the woman of the house, one of the posters, and she put it up in her living room on the wall. So this is the poster that changed my life. One of the anti-Sandinistas neighbors came over for a consultation, and she had her 8 or 9-year-old son with her. And their neighbor's child was left alone in the room while the 2 women went off to get some health care consultation. And he'd never been in the house before. He was looking around, trying to see how they lived differently than he did. And he immediately was attracted to this poster, the bright color, the strong graphic, and then he goes over to it, and he was short, and the poster was up high, and I watched him mouthing the words, "In constructing the new country, we are becoming the new woman." And this is the Nicaraguan Women's Association, and I watched him try to figure out what the poster meant. And I doubt that he figured out what it meant. It's a pretty sophisticated concept for an 8 or 9-year-old. But that wasn't the point. The point for me that was my epiphany moment. That was the moment, literally, the light bulb went off. That's how posters work. You're going about your daily life. You're not making a special trip to a museum to see, you know, a Picasso. You're going about your daily life, and there's this thing that attracts your attention by its bold color, its slogan, its graphic. And it makes you stop, it makes you think, it makes you ask a question. And every time we ask a question, we're different. Questions change us because it kind of breaks through the bubble that we always have, that we know what we need to know to get through the day. But posters are able to break through that and make us see the world a little differently than we saw the world before the poster. When we started the center, it was still, political posters were not considered art form. They were considered agitprop, which is a pejorative. Political art, just to call something political art, is also pejorative. There's the fine arts, there's the high arts, and they never combine politics, which of course is, they don't know their art history, because Guernica is one of the most extraordinary paintings. In fact, I think Time magazine called the Guernica the most important piece of art of the 20th century. And you certainly cannot call that not political. That's what made it. But for the most part, the museums don't show political art unless it's by a Picasso or somebody who's already famous for something else. So political posters were not only not considered an art form, but they're basically the stepchild of the art world. And one of the things that the Center for the Study of Political Graphics is trying to do is get political posters taken seriously as an art form. There was a big anti-Vietnam War demonstration scheduled for June 23rd, 1967 in Century City. And it was a very, middle-class demonstration. A lot of, Hollywood types and people like Muhammad Ali were speaking at the rally ahead of time. But the people who did organize it had a permit. It was all a legal demonstration. They did all the publicity, and it was a really big turnout. It was the biggest demonstration LA had ever seen at that point. And I remember I was walking with my sister. We were probably like in the first third of the demonstration, so there were people still, walking from Rancho Park was where it started. And then there was a row, a very deep row, so row across and rows deep, of LAPD motorcycle cops with the riot gear and the helmets and the motorcycles, and somebody with a megaphone or something said, okay, we've rescinded the permit, this is now an illegal demonstration, turn around and go back. Well, A, people didn't want to go back. B, people in the back couldn't hear. And then I don't remember, it could have been 2 minutes, it could have been 5 minutes, it could have been 10 minutes. It doesn't really matter, because they started en masse riding their motorcycles right into the crowd, swinging the billy clubs left and right. And it was just by chance. There was a woman in front of me who got hit when the billy club went that way, and there was a woman over there that got hit when the billy club went that way. So literally, I was in the triangle of the movement of the motorcycle. I just was in the triangle that was safe. And then I was shocked that the police would do that. I mean, we were doing something. We weren't doing anything illegal. We weren't doing anything violent. We were just, and it started out, it was legal. And I just couldn't believe that they would do that. And prior to Century City, I really wasn't committed to demonstrations. I went to a couple not safe, but easy ones. But after the Century City demonstration, I was not going to miss a demonstration. I don't know if this poster is going to make a difference, or that poster stopped the war, or that poster changed somebody's life. I know a poster changed my life. And I know graphics changed Martin Luther King's life. I'd have specific examples of graphics and images changing people's lives. But if we didn't try to make things better, we know they're going to get worse faster. And so I can't guarantee you anything. I can't prove that this is going to make a difference. But I can guarantee that if people like the artists who made these posters and the organizations that were working around getting these posters made and distributed, if they weren't doing that work, this world would be in a way worse shape, a lot faster. So I'd rather err on the side of trying to make things better, leaving the world a better place than I found it, than say, just go off and go to the beach.
Ernie Marquez lives in West Hills. You would not know from the exterior of his home that anything very different is going on from the homes around it. Although, of course, that makes you wonder what's going on in the homes around it, because Ernie Marquez is a descendant of the earliest families in Southern California. He bears the responsibility of all those generations weighing down on him, and yet at the same time, he's got a sense of humor about himself. He is an impeccable collector. He preserves his archives very judiciously. Ernie is also, in a way, creating his own artifacts with these glorious tile-bejeweled tombstones that he's placing on his previously unmarked ancestors' graves on the Marquez family land, which is, of course, no longer the Marquez family land, which is a hillside in Pacific Palisades that you only get to because of an easement not so gleefully granted by his neighbors. You shake Ernie Marquez's hand, and it's as if you're shaking the hand of Junipero Serra. You're shaking the hand of De Anza or Portola, because his ancestors were among those expeditions.
When I was growing up, I didn't want to be Mexican. I wanted to be like the other kids living in Santa Monica Canyon. There was a lot of prejudice in those days. Some of the mothers didn't want their kids playing with me. You feel this, and there's nothing you can do about it. You just live with it. When I grew up as an adult, I realized that what an important background I have. The reason why I started collecting was to get information, documents, and papers, and photographs of my family. So I went to the library, got history books about Santa Monica and Los Angeles. Couldn't find anything about our rancho in them. The historians completely ignored our family and our rancho for some reason. If there was some mention of it, there might have been a paragraph or two, but that was about all. 175 years ago, land was available to practically anybody that wanted it. They could ask for it and they'd give it to them, because Spain and Mexico wanted to occupy the land. The only way they could get the land was to give it to them. My great-grandfather was born in Guadalajara, Mexico. He was 26 years old when he came to Los Angeles. In 1839, he was living as a neighbor to Isidro Reyes, so they knew each other because they were neighbors. Isidro's uncle had the land grant rancho Boca de Santa Monica. They didn't want it anymore, so he asked my great-grandfathers if they wanted it, and they said yes, so he gave it to them. And then they applied to the Mexican government for the title to the land grant. And in order to get that, you had to be a Mexican citizen. You have to be a person of good character. You had to embrace the Catholic faith. You had to grow fruit trees on the land, and you had to have 200 head of cattle. So you didn't buy it in those days. Francisco built his adobe house in Santa Monica Canyon on the Upper Mesa. Isidro Reyes built his house on Huntington Palisades near Sunset Boulevard. And when the United States took over and the land was partitioned among all the heirs of Francisco Marquez, and each one knew what portion of land was theirs, they had to pay taxes on them. When you had large parcels of land, that was a lot of money. And my ancestors weren't working. They didn't have a job. They didn't have an income. So the taxes were a liability. So what was easiest? Get rid of the land, so you don't have to pay the taxes. I originally started looking for photos of the rancho period because I was writing the history of the rancho and of my family, and I wanted pictures of it, and discovered that there wasn't any. But along the way, found these other images of Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Redondo Beach. You see something and you know you don't have it and you want it. And you get it by any means, But I had to buy things without telling my wife I spent the money. I would bring the item home, bought it on impulse, and take it out to my room in the garage and put it away. We were struggling. We didn't have a lot of money, but I was spending it on stuff that made me happy, but it had nothing to do with the family. And when I aged, it was clear to me that I had to do something. I didn't want to die and leave this collection. So I decided, I called the Huntington and asked Jenny Watts if she was interested, and she said, of course. And she came over and looked at it, and they decided they would take it. And I was delighted because I couldn't think of any place else I'd rather have the collection. As I read the books published about the land grants, they were all written by history professors. And I realized after reading those books that there wasn't a family that retained the land as long as ours did. There's two parcels still remaining of the rancho. One is my cousin. She lives on the land, Rancho Boca de Santa Monica, and I own our family cemetery in Santa Monica Canyon. That's still in the family, and it will probably remain so forever, This is a photograph taken of a cemetery in 1908, showing what it looked like in those days. And you can still see part of the ruins of the original adobe house here. And the big cross is my grandmother, who is buried here, Michaela Reyes, and 7th Street Hill that's coming down. But it was all empty land. There were no houses or anything here when the cemetery was established. It was built or established right next door to the house that they were living in. We believe there's about 34 people buried here. We determined that by scientists from the Coatson Institute at UCLA came out with their radar ground penetration. And these little flags that you see on the ground here are from forensic dogs who came and could sniff the ground, and they could determine whether there's human remains still in the ground. So that's how we got the estimate. We know the names of the persons that died, but we don't know where they're buried. I plan to mark the graves with crosses that I'm making myself out of materials that I think you would find in the rancho back in those days, made out of rocks and branches of trees, and anything that would resemble, or you could think of the rancho by looking at the crosses. I've been working on these crosses for about 2 or 3 years, and I'm slowly achieving what I want to do. I should have them all finished by this year sometime. My family deserve to be recognized as the original family in Santa Monica Canyon. They deserve to be recognized as the original family that came to California in 1769. We're not newcomers to California. We were among the founders of California. And I think they deserve to be recognized and remembered for that.
Next up, we're going to spend a little time with Kent Kirkton and Keith Rice at the Tom and Ethel Bradley Center at Cal State Northridge. Kent Kirkton started a collection without, as so often happens, quite meaning to, of African-American photography in Southern California. African-American photography in Southern California, especially journalistic photography, gives a different angle on the known history or the history we think we know. Los Angeles Times has never been completely oblivious to African-American history. At times they've even been rather attentive to it, but attentive to it at specific times. If there's a shooting in South Central Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Times is right on the scene with photographs of, the aftermath of a god-awful event. Well, the Los Angeles Sentinel, the California Eagle, these were African-American papers based in these neighborhoods. And so they're not just covering crime, although they didn't ignore it. They're covering birthday parties and political rallies and the most natural, mundane aspects of African-American lives as they were lived in Southern California, which the LA Times, God love it, was fairly oblivious to. You see Los Angeles treated as a small town, because in effect these were small town newspapers. They were smaller in some cases than they wanted to be because restrictive covenants kept them from getting any bigger. So it is a fascinating sort of documentary history of a Los Angeles that you would never see reading more mainstream papers.
We talk about the important historical events that newspaper photographers covered, and it's important for the people of the city to be able to recover their own history, and there really isn't much of a place to do this. When you bring this stuff together in a collection, in an archive, then you can begin to see what great work they've done, what great documentation for the community they've done, and how important it is. We're primarily an archives with a focus on the ethnic communities in the Los Angeles region. The collection came to be, it's one of those long serendipitous stories, but as a faculty member, I was interested in the alternative press. And I was interested in whether the alternative press was using photography differently than the mainstream press. And I was working on writing an academic paper. And I was looking for some images from Black LA to go with the paper, and I couldn't find any. And I didn't know all of the archives in town, and I didn't know all the libraries and stuff, but nonetheless, what I was searching, I couldn't find anything, and I thought, it's amazing to the extent to which the ethnic communities in this city are undocumented in the institutional holdings. The mainstream newspapers hold their own archives in the morgue, right? They've got it all. So there was no sense in trying to get into that area of collecting because they're not going to let go of that. But the photographers working on alternative newspapers were all freelancers, and they owned all their own stuff. So once I figured that out, met the first couple of black photographers that I met, things really began to take off then. We now hold over 1 million photographic images. About 850,000 of them are produced by African-American photographers. Most of the black photographers whose work we have collected were not schooled. They didn't really think of themselves as photographers in the way contemporary photographers do. And so, for instance, Harry Adams, who was a barber, started making photographs, and somebody said, hey, can I have some copies of those, this, that, and the other thing? And he started practicing a little bit and selling a few photographs. And his barbershop was next door to the Los Angeles Sentinel. And Los Angeles Sentinel was one of 2 major papers in the black community at the time, the other being the California Eagle. And Harry went to work for them as best we can tell. His earliest photographs are around 1958. Harry was shooting 4x5s with a speed graphic, right? The sheet of film was expensive. He got paid for the print, by the print that he turned into the newspaper. And it didn't occur to him to come back and oh, let's go down Central Avenue and make some shots just for the fun of it, just because I like it, you know. He didn't have a roll of film in his camera. He had 1 or 2 sheets. He went out and shot the job, came back, turned it in, got paid. It was his job. And he approached it like any working guy would approach his job. And he put down his camera at the end of the day and said, "Shoo, I'm going home."
I love LA history. You know, it's fascinating history. It's not credited or given the credit it's due as far as African Americans are concerned, you know, and civil rights and everything, and I find that really interesting. We always look at that as a Southern thing. You know, people came to LA, oh, there was no discrimination in LA. LA, everybody was happy and everybody got along. I just did an oral history with an interview with Mrs. Nola Carter, who is the mother of Alprentice Bunchy Carter, who started a Black Panther Party here in Los Angeles and was killed at UCLA. She's 96 years old, and she was telling me when she left Shreveport, Louisiana, she knew what discrimination was, even though she really didn't encounter a lot of discrimination. She went to an all-black school, she shopped in white stores, black stores, but you knew when you got on the streetcars, it said white, it said black. What she told me is when she got to LA, there were no signs. But when you got on a bus or a trolley and you sat in a car or in a seat, a white person would get up and stand and hold on. And that's how discrimination was played out here. So I say that to say that, you know, LA wasn't what people thought it was totally. And people also didn't recognize that actors and everybody, they helped support the civil rights movement. There's a lot of money in Los Angeles. So they would come, Dr. King seemed like from these photographs, it seemed like he was here every other month, raising money to support his work in the South.
In 1963, Dr. King came to speak in Los Angeles. He was here for the weekend. And, you know, Raphael Abernathy was there and Sammy Davis Jr. and, you know, a whole list of Hollywood notables that were supportive of the civil rights movement. And the story that I've heard many times is they collected so much money for the SCLC that day that they took big plastic garbage cans up into the stands and filled them with folding money, which they then carried down and had to take off and count all the ones and fives and what, but they had garbage cans full of money that they collected for him that day. And it was a high point in the community as part of the civil rights movement. And we have photographs from more than one of the photographers that covered that event. And you can see that it's a celebratory event. The Los Angeles Times was there. And at one point, some guy wanted to say something or what, I don't know. Anyhow, he tried to take the microphone, tried to go up on the stand and take get control of the microphone. And a couple of policemen grabbed him and took him away. That was the photograph that the Los Angeles Times used, right? As if some kind of violence had occurred at this event. The work of these photographers differs from mainstream photographers in a couple of ways. First is in the subjects they select. And secondly is in their sense of who they're photographing, and their membership in the community leads them to have a different perspective on the people they're photographing than the big metropolitan paper that drops into the neighborhood occasionally, usually to cover some crime or some other circumstances. We participated in the Pacific Standard Time project that the Getty organized. And the title of our show was Identity and Affirmation. We chose that to reflect what was going on in the Black community during this post-war period. This was a time when the Black community was a bit more affluent. It was a little stratified, certainly at the top end they were affluent. And The photographs reflect that at the time there were a lot of activities that were meant to demonstrate they deserved full citizenship in the country, that they were doing things equally as the mainstream was doing, and they were reaffirming. They were affirming their own progress and status.
This work is rewarding to me because I don't think African Americans, I don't think we even value this information. I don't think we value history as much as we should. But because a lot of young people have no idea of why they can do the things they can do. Knowing that anything that black people do now is because somebody before them did the work.
The Institute for Arts and Media here at California State University has recently partnered with the Tom and Ethel Bradley Foundation. And we have created the Tom and Ethel Bradley Center here on campus. Because of our mutual interest, we are broadening our collecting policy. So we really want to expand our areas now into a broader effort to tell the stories of the ethnic communities in Los Angeles. So our goal here is to make this a major national research center where we'll have scholars coming from wherever. If they're interested in Los Angeles or various ethnic communities in Los Angeles, they'll know, it'll soon be clear that this is a place for them to do their research.
Jim Kepner was obsessed with two things. He was a resident of Southern California in the mid-20th century, and he loved science fiction. But of course, a lot of us love science fiction. He loved science fiction as only a magpie can. He kept magazines that were not even intended by their editors to be anything more than completely disposable. He hung on to these things. Jim Kepner was also gay at a time when that was not an easy thing to be. And so he began collecting, alongside his science fiction collection, materials pertaining to gay history in Southern California, all LGBT history in Southern California. Gay memorabilia, because its collectors had to be so furtive to preserve their freedom, you almost never find clean copies of any of this. So apart from their historical value, it's remarkable that these are pristine. He has kept these in absolutely impeccable shape. And so when he died, he is so lucky posthumously that a man like Joseph Hawkins became the custodian of these two collections. Joseph Hawkins thought he was coming aboard to look after a collection of LGBT history. And if that were all that he cataloged and preserved and creates exhibitions around, we would be duly grateful to him. But of course, he also inherited the science fiction collection of Jim Kepner. And to his everlasting credit, he didn't just say, oh, this we don't need, we're going to concentrate on that. No, he cataloged both of them so lovingly that he started to notice that there was strange crossover. Science fiction fandom in Southern California in the 20th century was, in addition to its love for that form in its own right, also a way for LGBT people to meet under a stigmatized, but at least not illegal, cover. And so it's a remarkable window onto two differently but also similarly marginalized subcultures in Southern California, which had a cross-pollination nobody had ever dreamt of before.
The collection began with a guy named Jim Kepner, actually, back in the 1950s. He was a pack rat extraordinaire. He collected everything he could get his hands on. He read 5 to 6 newspapers a day, took clippings out, anything that had to do with LGBTQ things he was interested in. And at some point, what happened was he began to develop an interest in science fiction. And the collection that this is focusing on is in fact a collection that grew out of his fascination with science fiction and the science fiction community. The science fiction materials and the homophile materials were two separate interests of Kepner's, and so therefore were collected separately as well, but by Kepner. So that's how they're united. In the initial phases, I also think that there was a kind of crossover whereby if you were in the sci-fi world, you were ostracized and considered strange in the same way that you were considered strange if you were a part of the homophile movement. He began by joining a number of different fan groups, and the fan groups were personed by a number of different people who used AKAs, or also known as names, which would become a practice that was then extended on into the homophile movement, which was developed in the 1950s. This is one of my favorite things in this collection. This is published on the occasion of the 1500 meeting, May 12, 1966. This is a look back at the Science Fiction and Fantasy Society, and it includes images from all the people who are a part of the group. So it becomes this really integral group that I think that if you look back at the literature, you find that Kepner is not the only person who's participating in the group, and that they are using it as a way to explore the possibility of how sexuality might be different in the future, and that there might be a possible world for them to live in which their sexuality is in fact accepted and a part of everyday life. Los Angeles seems to be a center of early sci-fi and homophile development. There seems to also be a kind of image where this was a place where folks could reinvent themselves. People could be something that they weren't under the scrutiny of the old world, which was East Coast based. So you could actually come to the new frontier, which was California, and reinvent yourself. So I think a lot of things did start here, but the sci-fi fan groups were in Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and they actually had correspondence, they had meeting notes, and all of those are contained in Kepner's collection because he was a member of the boards of many of those institutions. There was also correspondence with people in England and other countries. So it was not only national, but international in scope, but it was a very small, very homespun kind of feel compared to what it is today. So I think that there was a mutual sort of admiration society that developed around it. And I'm certainly not trying to say that all these groups had huge homosexual overtones. What I am trying to say is that certainly homosexuals as a group of people were disproportionately, it seems to me, interested in these groups because of their ability to create cover for meetings. Kepner always knew, Kepner was one of those people who lived his life well beyond the period that he lived in. He, in his imagination, was able to envision a world where homosexuality would, he thought about gay people marrying way back in the 1950s. He was always talking about that. I think that's why partly his attraction to science fiction was so strong in him, because he could actually look back on his life and think about what possibilities could be. And that's why science fiction was so attractive to him, because it was a way to imagine a future that he could be free and he could live his life the way he wanted to live his life. And that just wasn't possible in his time. What I'm really hoping for is that a new generation of young people will come and do research on this material and find out what I haven't found out. This organization and this collection is fantastic in the sense that every day there's more possibility for finding out something that has been erased from the past. And in this particular case, I had no idea when I came upon these materials that there was any connection whatsoever between homosexuality and the sci-fi movement. I think the evidence is clear that there's a really deep connection, and I think that it would be really great if researchers came and found out more about how that exchange has gone over time.
cameras are gone, the news are all won, the party goes on. Done, it's been said, and up goes the flag. An ox has been killed.